Hello, my name is Kirsten Fiskus, and I'm a breaking news reporter with the Tennessee and USA Today. They moved us from our old room in the prison at 9:46 to the parole board. And then from there, at 10:17, we moved to the witness chamber. At 10:19, the lights went off, and we kind of sat in silence. Nichols' sister was present in the room with us. She was very emotional about what was about to happen. At 10:24, we could hear movement in the chamber, and then the mic turned on and they did a mic check, and then we could kind of hear his spiritual advisor talking with Nichols very softly. At 10:25, the blinds opened and his spiritual advisor was on his left side. We had a view of Nichols from the right. His arms were outstretched. He had a sheet pulled up to about his belly button, and he was wearing a yellow prison uniform, and he had his black glasses on. His hands were covered by the sheet, but we could see that he had an IV in his right arm just below the crook of his elbow. And then from there, tubes flowed from his body to the wall behind him. They asked if he would like to give any last words at 10:25. And you've already heard them, but I'll repeat them. To which he said, "To the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. To my friends, I love each one of you. Beyond that, I know where I'm going, so I'm ready to go home." At 10:26, his spiritual advisor leaned down and said he was going to read to him from the Bible and read some prayers. And at one point, he commented that he was probably going to get emotional while he did it. Several times, his spiritual advisor did choke up, and he did let out a couple sobs. Nichols was tapping, looked like he was tapping his right foot. As this was going on, he was reading. His spiritual advisor at 10:28, again, got emotional as he read to him, and Nichols nodded his head in affirmation. And then they moved to the Lord's Prayer, in which Nichols repeated the Lord's Prayer with his spiritual advisor. At 10:29, I noted that Nichols nods and he's blinking, he's still breathing. And then at 10:30, his breath really quickened. He got very deep breaths, and he groaned, and he blew out air out of his mouth a couple of times, moving his mustache like this twice. And then at 10:31, I noted that his breath slowed almost to the point where there were no obvious signs of breath. I could not see his chest rising and falling anymore. At 10:32, a little door in the wall opened, and they put out what I think is a white rock in the door. And then about 5 minutes later, they closed the blinds. In the meantime, about 10:36, I noted that his face had gotten really bright red during the process, and at 10:36, it kind of paled to purple. And then at 10:37, the blinds went down, but the mic was left on. And at 10:39, I noted that there was movement, and you could hear on the mic, and that there were some sniffles, who I presume was his spiritual advisor. And then out of thin air, there was a man who just said 10:39, gave no indication of what that was, presumably time of death. And then a different voice came on over the mic and said the sentence has been carried out, and asked the witnesses to leave. And from there, we left the room.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Sweeney. I'm the health reporter for WPLN Nashville Public Radio. I'm going to repeat a lot of things that you just heard from Kirsten, so I apologize for that. At 10:25, the curtain opened. We heard the last statement. I won't rehash that. There appeared to be a wound on the arm that we could see from the witness stand, and there appeared to be some blood around the IV site. At 10:27, I noted that his one foot was moving. It seemed to be going back and forth. That would have been the right foot closest to us, not the left foot. It seemed to be still. At 10:28, he was nodding along with his spiritual advisor, and I noted that his foot began shifting again. The sheet was pulled up to his restraints. Oscar Franklin Smith's sheet was not pulled up that high. Byron Black's sheet was pulled up that high for about half of the execution, and then somebody in the room pulled the sheet down further. But Harold Wayne Nichols' sheet remained high the entire time. The two began saying the Lord's Prayer together at 10:28, and that's when I started noticing the face might be reddening. It was gradual, so it was hard to tell for sure. At 10:29, he was still speaking. Thank you. At that point, somebody's breath was coming over the mic. It was hard to tell whether it was his spiritual advisor or his at that point. But at 10:30, I have a note that he began sighing and groaning. There was some congested sounds. And as Kirsten said, his mustache kind of puffed up and down. He had a thick white mustache and it was a little long. And at 10:31, he became very still. At 10:32, the rock was put out. There was a clicking sound at 10:34. I couldn't identify it, and a mechanical sound shortly after. At 10:35, I noted that he seemed more purple than red. And at 10:36, I noted that he was definitely purple. At 10:37, the curtain closed. We heard some loud bangs, the sound of what seemed like cabinet doors opening and closing, some shuffling paper sounds. As Kirsten noted, sniffling that was presumably from the spiritual advisor, but of course with the curtain closed, we couldn't tell. Time of death was announced at 10:39. Again, during Byron Black's execution, the doctor identified himself and said, time of death is the time it was. It was just 10:39. And then somebody else came over the mic and let us know that 10:39 was the time of death and asked the witnesses to leave the room.
Good morning, my name is Holly Laren. I'm a digital producer for News Channel 5. We were ushered into the room and as said before, 10:25, the curtain opened. I apologize in advance. I'll be repeating a lot what's already been said. Mr. Nichols said his last words ending with, "I know where I'm going and I'm going home." On his right arm, there did seem to be a spot of blood where the IV was inserted. At 10:28, he was speaking with his spiritual advisor. It was a very emotional conversation, saying the Lord's Prayer. At some point, his advisor said, "People will tell your story." Mr. Nichols' sister nodded at that. At 10:31, Mr. Nichols seemed to appear still. He seemed to expel a long breath, and his coloration did change, as said before. At 10:37, the curtain closed, and at 10:39, the time of death was reported. I also was not in a position to see a rock being moved, but I was able to see Mr. Nichols' face and his advisors. It was yes, it was a very sad, emotional conversation. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Travis Lawler with the Associated Press here in Nashville. So at 10:25:19, the curtains were raised. Mr. Nichols was on the gurney. We could see he was perpendicular to us, so we saw basically his right side. He was in a yellow prison shirt. It looked like a white t-shirt under. He had his glasses on. We could see the IV inserted. As people said, it did look like there was a little blood at the insertion site. His chest was strapped down with what looked like a sort of 6-point restraint, looked like a seat belt almost, with the big buckles and black webbing. His foot was twitching, as other people said. There was a second line that looked more like a coated wire that you could see going under his shirt. I think was perhaps that attached to the EKG, but I don't know for sure. He was asked to give his last words, which other people have said. It was a little hard to hear part of what he said, but I believe he said, you know, to the people I've harmed, I'm sorry. To my family, know that I love you. And I believe he said to my multitude of friends, I love each one of you. Beyond that, I know where I'm going. so I'm ready to go home. The pastor started speaking. He was reading from the Bible. He said, "This is Jesus speaking," and recited some Bible passages. Then he said, "I'm going to say Psalm 23, which you know," and he started speaking, "The Lord is my shepherd," and Mr. Nichols started speaking with him, and they both were sort of choking up a little and tearing up. And then at 10:28:30, the pastor said, "Let's recite the Lord's Prayer together," or I don't know his exact words, but something along those lines. And they started reciting the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven." And when it got to the Amen, I could hear Nichols I could hear him very well say Amen, and he was nodding his head, and the pastor was nodding. The pastor had his hand on Nichols' shoulder, his left shoulder, and was standing behind him from our perspective, and they were nodding at each other, and they were sort of continued talking softly. I couldn't hear everything that they said, or I couldn't hear most of what they said, but I did hear the pastor say, "Go in peace, my friend. I love you." And Mr. Nichols was nodding at him. And at one point he said, "You'll be looking down on us. I know that." The pastor said that. At 10:30:18, we could see Mr. Nichols take a very large breath, and you could see his torso rise up. And then he took a series of these sort of huffing breaths that people said it's sort of maybe a snoring or snorting kind of sound, and you could literally see his mustache rising, like he's breathing through his mouth. About 10 breaths along that, like that, and then it became harder to tell whether he was breathing. His breaths became much shallower. And then at 10:33:35 was when the rock was placed outside, this little sort of flap that we think signals the end of the chemicals being pushed, but we don't know for sure. His skin did change color. I definitely noticed it turned kind of purplish. 10:37:35, they closed the blinds. And then at 10:39, we heard the announcement of death declared. So, although they didn't say that, all they said is the time is 10:39 or something like that. But anyway, thanks. So, people want to ask questions? Is that next? Does everyone want to come up?
Does anyone have questions?
For those who have witnessed before, any differences between this one and the others?
Yeah. As I talked about a little bit, the sheet was pulled up a lot higher than it had been before. It was all the way up to the restraint. So we could still see the IV injection site, but pretty much the whole forearm was hidden. And for anybody who wasn't here for the last couple, we could see both Byron Black and Oscar Franklin Smith's hands. They were covered in what appeared to be kinesiology tape. We could not see Harold Wayne Nichols' hands. I think that was the biggest takeaway that was different for me.
I did not witness the last one, but I witnessed the first one, Oscar Franklin Smith. I commented to them that this one felt very fast compared to the first one. I don't know if it was just because they hadn't done one in a while for Oscar Franklin Smith. And then the hands, where you could see that they were bound up for Oscar Franklin Smith, but this time we couldn't even tell that because the sheet was pulled up over his hand.
Yeah, I think I also was at the Oscar Smith one, and I think that was the first time that they had allowed a spiritual advisor to be in the room with him, and she spoke for a long time. I mean, she spoke for a long time, so I think that is part of why that one was longer. And also with Smith, I didn't see that. I mean, he did, he just sort of seemed to sort of gradually fade away. I don't recall seeing the big huff and hearing the noises that I did with this one. So I don't know what that means, but it's just different.